friend Shannon from alphatrends.net. Today is Friday, the 25th of June, 2021, and the S&P is at a new all-time high. Let's take a look at these numbers first, then we'll go back to the charts. For the week, we gained close to 3%, bringing us back to positive for the month. NASDAQ up 2%, Russell up 4%, semis, etc. All across the board higher, with the exception of bonds and that volatility index, which will obviously go lower when the market is as bullish as this is. Last week I said we don't want to buy the dip, and I always say that. We don't want to be a dip buyer. We want to be a buyer of strength after a dip. One way that might have looked is Monday morning buying above Friday's high. If you had done that, you can see that the volume weighted average price for the week, we were above the entire week. There were plenty of other opportunities to get involved here as well. The main point though at Alpha Trends is I try to focus on the action in individual names. And when the market pulls back like that, we never know what's going to happen next. Certainly the buy the dip crowd has been right, but how much pain are you willing to experience in order to be correct? This time it worked well, and that's great. Just don't let bad habits develop during a market like this where we see it does come back so quickly. Let's look at the NASDAQ. Down a little bit today, but still just one day off of an all-time high here. So the prior band of resistance is likely to be, continue to hold as support near that 341-ish level. We also have that rising 20-day moving average in that area. We're above the rising 5-day moving average. So going into next week, we continue to give the benefit of the doubt to the buyers overall. It looks like the Russell 2000 is about to break out. This is a scenario I was talking about last week. We were down at the midpoint of the range, and if we could see it rally, this now creates an important higher low in the midpoint of that range. It looks to me like the Russell 2000 is ready to break higher, and that should obviously have a lot of good action for the individual names. Now, the thing to be concerned about is if you're not long currently, do you want to buy a so-called breakout above this level? The reason I ask that is, similar to buying the dip. We don't know if this is going to be the low, buying the dip here, or getting lucky and buying the dip there. Similar, where have we come from? We've just rallied from 221 up to 233. A pretty good move, about 5-6% in a short period of time. So now what we'd really like to see is for it to pull back, create a higher low, and then break out. That might even look like a little inverted head and shoulders pattern here on this 30-minute chart that goes back to the beginning of June here. That's that June volume weighted average price. And ideally, it would, maybe do that, come to the month to date volume weighted average price and that 5-day moving average. But ideally, we want to see a little bit of a pullback and refresh. Now, the market's not always going to give us what we want. That's very clear. It never gives me what I want all the time. That's it's a certainty. But the semiconductors also right up against this trend line. They look like they're breaking higher. They made a higher low this week, and that's going to be an important level to measure risk against going forward. So again, the semiconductors, they look like they're ready to lead once again. Biotechs were the group that I was most focused on this week, as it had the lowest risk, higher probability setup, and it did indeed follow through to the upside the way that I kind of wanted it to, and that is that we wanted to see the 5-day moving average hold as support and then a series of higher highs and higher lows. I've been suggesting Alpha Trend subscribers had taken a third off yesterday, and now a worst case stop should probably be under here. I would say you could even probably get away with a stop near about 160 and a quarter or so. It looks to me like the biotech should be heading for new highs as well. They've carved out a nice little bottom in here. We're back above all these key moving averages and volume weighted average price levels. The path of least resistance is higher. If you follow me on Twitter, I had mentioned RBLX, Roblox, that I was anticipating a trade in here that it was going to get back above the 5-day moving average, and what we want to do is we want to buy it not on the gap, but it gets back above the volume weighted average price that day. It came right up to the volume weighted average price from this peak. So what we had done is put part of our stop at 87.05, and that did get hit, of course, this morning. So part of that position is out. We actually have 1/3 left, and I'm giving a stop on it down here to 83 and change just to see if maybe this one, can get past that 20-day moving average and continue to move higher. Some other names were involved in Lightspeed. This one was entered at 77.50, so this has been a nice performer for us. Vonage as well. Looks like, well, actually, it got stopped out right there at the close at 1466. So that was an entry at 1462. On average, we made about 20 cents in there. We're also involved in AMD at 84.05. And then today we purchased WWE at 59.35 and did sell a third here late in the day just to take a little bit of risk off, but looking for the possibility that it can get back up to the volume weighted average price from that event, or maybe the month to date looks a little bit more reasonable. Either way, stops will be raised in there. Some of the names I'm looking at for next week. Let's do this. Let's talk about Bitcoin first. Bitcoin, as we know, it broke down over here at 58,000. I said, looks like it's broken. And now my strategy is to buy after sharp pullbacks for bounces. It's going to take time to heal this market. We've got a 50-day moving average in here, and that's what this one is. You can see that is declining. The orange volume weighted average price is the year-to-date volume weighted average price. That means the average price paid this year is about 43,500. We're down at 32,000, so we're 13,000 below that. The average person is down pretty good this year. What you also see here is the volume weighted average price off the high. That's up at that same place. The volume weighted average price from this peak was hit just this past week, and the market fell from there. I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago it fell down, right? And now we've seen 4 tests of this volume weighted average price. That is, let's see if I can move this over here. The volume weighted average price from this breakout here in June of 2020. When it broke higher, the average price from that has been defended. But what we're seeing now, and we can see this actually on a 30, I guess I've got an hourly time frame here. The volume weighted average price from that most recent high acted as resistance once again, and here we are breaking down. I think that you've got to be very careful with Bitcoin. If it does something, if it rallies a little bit, creates a lower high, maybe near 33.5 or so, and then if it comes back over to this daily time frame and we're breaking down, I think the next level that you want to be interested in is the lows from March of 2020. That average price is at about 24, just under 24. So I think there's a lot of risk in Bitcoin right now, perhaps down to 24,000. Let's take a look at some stocks for the upside for next week that are, I haven't really done my full analysis on these yet, but some ideas for my watch list next week include Ambarella. The volume weighted average price year to date has been a little bit tricky for it. The volume weighted average price from the peak is also there, you can see. So when we look at a 30-minute time frame, for instance, there's that volume weighted average price year to date, and we came down, let's look at the 15-minute time frame, to the 5-day moving average here today, and the week to date volume weighted average price. So it probably needs, I would think, another day or two of just kind of building in here before it's able to show us a low risk entry. Maybe it does something like this. And then, Wednesday of next week. So I would want to put a volume weighted average price off of this peak and see how it responds to that. Maybe it can, start to flatten that volume weighted average price out. The 5-day moving average comes up underneath it and pinches. And then we could possibly buy here with a stop underneath this low, if that is in fact the case. This is how I go through stocks every single day for subscribers to Alpha Trends. That is, I put out the potential scenarios and where we want to have our risk. AWH is another one that maybe isn't as great, but the 50-day moving average is starting to flatten out a little bit. It trades, only 389,000 shares. Forget I mentioned that one. COUR, this one came public. Here's our volume weight in April. Here's the volume weighted average price from that IPO. You can see it's been struggling to try and hold that, as well as the volume weighted average price from the peak and that rising 20-day moving average. So we want to look at a shorter term time frame. On the 30-minute time frame, here's our month to date volume weighted average price. Clearly, if we get involved, the risk is under here. If it breaks below there, forget about this stock. Next week, I'd like to see maybe it runs up on Monday. I wouldn't want to buy it if it breaks like this, but if it were to then create a higher low and then buy it here with a stop under this level, maybe half of a stop under here, half of a stop under here. Coursera could be a decent one, as we are now back above and holding above the volume weighted average price from the IPO. 1-800 Flowers is another one. It's been a nice pullback. This is why I don't buy pullbacks. I don't buy the dip. Do I buy the dip here? Do I buy the dip here, here at the 20-day moving average? No, there's just no sense in buying while it's pulling back. What we do is we use multiple time frame analysis and say, what's the intermediate term trend saying? Let's just do this and look at the 30-minute time frame. So just to make it simple, that's since the beginning of the month. Here's our volume weighted average price off of this peak, and that kind of ties together with the volume weighted average price for the month. We still see a declining 5-day moving average, so I'm not interested in buying this. I wouldn't have purchased it here because the 5-day moving average is declining. I want to buy it if it's above a flat to advancing 5-day moving average. So if it were to look like this going into maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, I would maybe want to buy some here with a stop. Worst case under this low, maybe half of it under here. I would be aware of this as a potential level of resistance, but because the bigger picture is still bullish, especially looking at the weekly time frame, it can be a little bit choppy. I probably wouldn't go a full size on something like that. A little speculative name is HOVF. This is Hall of Fame Entertainment Company, and these guys came public, you can see, back in looks like July of last year, so just about a year ago. The volume weighted average price year to date, and from that IPO we're also holding the rising 20-day moving average. It trades 3.4 million shares per day. The 30-minute time frame, it's building some, it's banging away at this resistance here. If it can get above that, maybe your worst case stop goes underneath this level here at about 445-ish or so. I've also got my eye on SNOW, S-N-O-W. This one, a little tricky in that, the year-to-date volume weighted average price it's been battling, but the volume weighted average price off the peak is still overhead. So if I were to get involved, I would definitely want to be aware that that has the potential to offer some supply. But looking down to a 30-minute time frame, it's looking like if we can get above this, the high of this week, ideally, again, we don't want to buy it as it runs like that and gets extended. Instead, we would rather see it kind of run up, back off, create a higher low, and then be a buyer over in this area with a stop just under here if that's the case. Another one to continue to keep an eye on is this Sientra, S-I-E-N. I've mentioned it a couple times. It kind of shook out this week, but it got caught by the rising 50-day moving average. I don't think it's time to get back involved in it yet, but it's nice to see it got back above that 5-day moving average, and we don't buy it above the 5-day moving average when that 5-day moving average is declining, because you can have stuff like this happen to you. So next week, maybe it does this, and then we could buy it above here, perhaps with a stop near 725. It's got a very big short position and a nice looking longer term chart. That's going to do it for me. Have a good weekend. Thanks for tuning in.